Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing. In the first topic, we'll try to analyze what are the needs and the arguments for the expansion of United Nations Security Council. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to understand the eco-fragile zones which exist in the Western Ghats and what are the causes for the landslides which takes place there. Then in your simplified section, we'll take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So stay tuned. At the 18th session of United Nations General Assembly, which is currently underway in New York, USA, our Honorable External Affairs Minister has stated that lack of resources and cross-border terrorism had left United Nations gridlocked, and thus he called for expansion of United Nations Security Council. A very important demand which is being raised by our diplomats at various international platforms and thus forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of international relations. So let's first try to develop our understanding a little bit about the 6 principal organs of United Nations. United Nations, which was officially created on 24th of October 1945 and consists of 6 principal organs. The first is the General Assembly, which is the body which takes the charge of main policy making, and representative body which consists 193 members currently. Then there is an Economic and Social Council which coordinate and do the policy review on very important economic and environmental issues, as for example the impending climate change. Then there exists a trusteeship council which provide international supervision for 11 trust territories under 7 states. For example, how the earlier Palestine was created as a protectorate state under the Britain and France. Then it also consists of a very important secretariat which consists of your Secretary General of United Nations as well as the more than 10,000 staff members who carry out the day-to-day work as it is mandated by the United Nations General Assembly. All of these 6 principal organs except one is located in New York, USA. The one which is actually located in Hague, Netherlands, that is the International Court of Justice, to resolve disputes among the member states. Keep this in mind. One such very important principal organ of United Nations is your United Nations Security Council, which is charged with several important responsibilities, such as, for example, to maintain international peace and security, at least on the paper, to actually allow or recommend for inclusion of any new member to the United Nations General Assembly, or for example to actually call for various kind of arbitration and mediation with various other countries. So these are certain important functions which are the responsibility of the United Nations Security Council, which consists of 15 members. The question which shall arise in your mind is that how this United Nations Security Council actually came into the being with 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. Let's try to understand that. So from your world history class, you guys can actually recall that how after the First World War, which took place from 1914 to 1919, through your Paris Peace Conference and Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations was created. The idea was that such important international organization, which at that point of time had representation from various big powers at that point of time, such as for example France, Britain, minus Germany, so Germany was not included. USA never joined League of Nations. So the idea is that with such major economic and military power at that point of time, these countries will be able to cater to their demands, their colonial demands, as well as to also ensure global peace and tranquility, and thus preventing escalation to any such event which can lead to such global scale war as it happened during the World War I. However, with the kind of the geopolitical tussle for more power which was taking place at that point of time, and also because of the rise of fascism in Italy under Mussolini And in Germany, under Hitler, it basically led to the failure of League of Nations, which is often termed as League of Notions also, because all the noble ideas it had, it was only limited on the power, which is also reflected, for example, by the Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931, or for example, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, or Japan's invasion of China in 1937. The final nail to the coffin was provided by the Germany's invasion of Poland on 1st of September 1939, where following the idea of Lebensraum, Hitler basically ended up invading the Poland. What is the idea of Lebensraum? So Hitler basically believed that the population of Germany, which consisted of superior race, that is Aryans, it had grown so exponentially that the kind of the limited reserves which Germany has, as well as the limited geographical area it has become unsustainable to cater to this kind of large scale population. And thus it called for the incorporation of the traditional area, historical areas on which Germany at one point of time had the command, thus creating more living space or Lebensraum. And this onset of Second World War basically led to the complete failure of League of Nations. Thus, when the World War II was taking place, the Allied powers, they started calling for creation of another international organization which will be able to maintain peace and security in the future. But this time, the big powers or the Allied powers at that point of time, such as for example US, UK, France, China, USSR, all of these countries basically wanted to hold some significant power in their hand so that they can dictate the global order of the future. And the reflection of that for the first time was the Atlantic Charter, which was signed between US and UK on 14th of August 1941, where these big powers, they basically gave the right of self-determination to all the colonies, that please help us in the war. After we win, you guys have the right to self-determine whether you want to remain our commonwealth or dominion or not, or do you want to become an independent country. At the same time, the idea was to create an international organization for global cooperation for better socio-economic conditions for all countries. That further translated in the London Declaration of 1942, where countries like US, UK, France, China, USSR, called as the Big Five, they called for creation of such an international organization to ensure global peace and free market. So basically the idea of laissez-faire as propounded by Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations. Ultimately, this formalized in the Oaks Conference in Washington DC 1944, leading to the creation of these Big Five countries. And in the Yalta Conference of 1945, the decision was taken that these Big Five countries can actually veto any decision which has been taken by the United Nations Security Council. We'll try to understand that how does this veto power works. The idea is that, remember, they can veto such decision, but they cannot veto the procedural resolutions which takes place in United Nations Security Council. So for example, if these countries, they want to debate on a particular resolution or a situation which is taking place, they can do that. They can criticize each other as well. But if one particular country of these permanent five, P5 members find that it is not, that particular decision is not catering to their interests, then they can veto it and that decision will not be implemented at all. So the question which shall arise in, then who are these non-permanent members, these 10 non-permanent members? These 10 non-permanent members are elected by the United Nations General Assembly itself, which consists of 193 members. And to become a non-permanent member, a candidate must receive at least 2/3 of all the votes which has been cast. What happens if two countries get same votes? Like for example, it happened in 1979 when both Cuba and Colombia, they both got an equal number of 154 votes. Then both of them had to withdraw, and Mexico was actually made a non-permanent member as a compromise candidate. In 2016, the same event was repeated with Italy and Netherlands this time. They both shared the term for 1 year each. So for example, when you become a non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council, you serve as one such member of UNSC for a total term of 2 years, which starts from 1st of January. 5 members are replaced every year, and the elections for these 5 members takes place through the United Nations General Assembly. Now let's say if India is a non-permanent member as it was back in 2021 and it retires, so can it opt for another immediate re-election? The answer is no. So a retiring member is not eligible for an immediate re-election. Thus, in this way, there exists under Chapter 5 from Article 23 to 32, which establishes the United Nations Security Council's function, consisting of 5 permanent member and 10 non-permanent member. Election of 5 members are taking place every year for a term of 2 years. So for example, African states has got 3 seats, but all of them are non-permanent in nature. Then Asia Pacific states has got 3 seats, out of which there is 1 permanent member, that is China. The Eastern European states has got 2 seats, of which Russia is a permanent member. Latin American and Caribbean states has got 2 seats but no permanent member. And Western European and other states has got 5 seats, out of which 3 of them are reserved for the big powers of 1945, that is France, UK and USA. Here, look at this table very closely and notice that how there is no permanent member from either of African state or from the Latin American and the Caribbean states. Thus, what are certain important functions of the United Nations Security Council? Why India wants to become a permanent member here? Why it is so important for us? Let's try to understand that. As per the Chapter 6 from Article 33 to 38, it basically empowers the United Nations Security Council to act as a mediator in any international dispute. So let's say for example, right now if there is an international dispute taking place and currently India is not a member of the UNSC, not a non-permanent member. So can India, basically kind of pass a resolution at UNG or UNSC to mediate in such event? The answer is no. So that power is completely lost to us now. Also, this United Nations Security Council can seek solution through mediation, negotiation and arbitration. A very classic example of that is the Suez crisis which took place in the year of 1956, when then Egyptian President Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at that point of time, he nationalized the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal which basically connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Arabian Sea. Thus, the countries like for example UK and France, they realized that they were earlier controlling this Suez Canal. So they have lost a very important strait which is very important for their trade, as well as they have lost their control over a very important geopolitical area of that point of time. Thus, in collusion with Israel, they basically invaded Egypt, attacked Egypt. However, Egypt was backed by USA and USSR, who basically wanted Suez Canal to be free for their trade as well. Thus, if you can see here that how 4 out of 5 permanent members are actually fighting among each other. So there was a resolution which was passed by USA and USSR which called for the kind of peaceful resolution of this conflict. However, it was actually vetoed by UK and France. So they used their veto power. Now this resolution will not be applicable. Ultimately, basically UK and France had to withdraw because of the kind of the economic sanctions which were imposed upon them by USA. USSR was more direct. It basically kind of gave an open nuclear threat to them. Then the Chapter 7 from Article 39 to 51 actually calls for enforceable action to determine any threat to the existence of peace or imposing sanctions or authorizing military forces, as it was done when Iraq invaded Kuwait during the first Gulf War in the year of 1990. When United Nations Security Council basically passed a resolution where it gave the power to the member states that they shall restore the sovereignty of Kuwait by all means possible. If you have to go to war with Iraq, you guys can completely go. Chapter 8, Article 52 to 54. It calls for peace settlement of local dispute through regional organizations like for example North Atlantic Treaty Organization, African Union or Arab League. Then Resolution 1674 acts or kind of cast a responsibility on the member of United Nations Security Council to actually protect the world population from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing and any crime which is being committed against humanity. The question arises that let's say for example there is such a resolution to be passed against some crime which is taking place against humanity in any part of the world. What is the process? How does the voting work? So Article 27 of the United Nations Charter basically says that, let's say for example, if such a resolution has to be passed, it shall be agreed by at least 9 members or 60% of the member. If there is any country who is abstaining, such abstention is not regarded as a veto, though all 5 permanent members must vote if there is a particular resolution which wants to amend the United Nations Charter. So let's say for example, if the UN Charter has to be amended to include another permanent member, that is our country, all 5 permanent member P5 countries shall come on the table and decide on that. In this particular case, if one country says that no, India shall not be member, then it is obvious that we will not be included. Why? Because then China or Russia or let's say USA is basically using their veto power. Keep this in mind that such procedural matters cannot be vetoed. So they cannot basically curtail any kind of debate altogether. So at several instances, our country has actually acted as a non-permanent member in United Nations Security Council. Let's try to have a reflection of India's journey at United Nations Security Council. So for example, we have been a non-permanent member in UNSC for 8 times, serving for at least 16 years. The last term which we had was back in 2021 to 22. Keep this in mind that in 1953, the kind of the global clout which we had at that point of time, the Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was actually elected as the first woman president of United Nations General Assembly. Then, through various international forums or let's say for example the initiatives which we had at that point of time, we had tried to bring or act as the voice of Global South. First example of that was the non-aligned movement, where we did not ideologically align with any country, either USSR or USA, which was basically taking place in the backdrop of the Cold War which was taking place. However, we had to basically kind of give up this non-aligned movement when USA came in the support of Pakistan during the Bangladesh Liberation War, and thus we had to sign a kind of a strategic friendship treaty with USSR in 1971. So, following the non-aligned movement, we basically supported the Egypt during the Suez crisis of 1956 as we discussed. In 1971, we strongly advocated for Bangladesh recognition and inclusion in the United Nations. Then obviously, having the colonial history, India very strongly raised the voice against the issue of apartheid and independence of Namibia in 1990 from South Africa, which was very recently in the news as our Prime Minister visited Namibia, and Namibia became the first African country in the world to actually adopt our United Payment Interface, UPI. So, what is the need of reforms in United Nations Security Council? Why India is calling for that? Let's first try to understand that. First and foremost, we have understood the important role which is played by UNSC. So, it is very important for us to get there, to have that decision-making power. The next few reasons are, first is the failure in dealing with the major crisis. So just like League of Nations, how we were talking about the various invasions which took place at that point of time, which basically kind of led League of Nations to become League of Notion, same has happened with the United Nations Security Council as well, which is reflected in its failure in dealing with major crises like for example ethnic genocide which took place in Rwanda or USA's uncalled invasion of Iraq. Then there are several major issues which has now emerged in the world, and that has become much more important from the geopolitical tensions of 1945. Like for example the issue of climate change, which has led to extreme weather events, heat waves, intensification of cyclones, cloud bursts, flash floods. But is there any particular initiative which this United Nations Security Council is taking in this regard? The answer is no. The large-scale war which is still prevailing, like for example in Eastern Europe or for example the various civil war inflicted areas in the region of Africa, has led to large-scale refugee issues as well. However, United Nations Security Council basically reflects at what? The policy blindness towards such issues. Just look how the number of the world's refugees actually increased to 34 million in 2020. With various such issues, for example Rohingyas in Myanmar, Afghanistan with the takeover of Taliban, South and South Sudan, Venezuela, almost 5 million refugees which fled from Ukraine because of the Russia's uncalled invasion. Then there is a major argument, and that is that how this United Nations Security Council is completely outdated, because it basically represents the global power how it existed in the year of 1945. But from then, there has been emergence of new economic and military powers, like for example, India, China, Germany, Brazil, Japan, etc. These are the countries which basically form the G4 or the grouping of four, and they majorly calls for the expansion of United Nations Security Council. When we are talking about this policy blindness towards climate change, keep this particular data in your mind, that how the global north, which basically accounts for more than 2/3 of the CO2 emission leading to the greenhouse gases, and thus is a major contributor in the global warming which is taking place, and look at their financial responsibility, how the kind of the development assistance to the small island nation has been kept on declining. And obviously that is not a kind of a major discussion which is taking place at the forum of United Nations Security Council. The major reason for that is because it is representative of a microscopic power minority. Just look at the numbers here, how it no longer represents the world. In the year of 1945, there were 5 permanent members, 11 non-permanent members, and the total members, Security Council seats were 11 total, so 5 permanent members, 6 non-permanent members, and 51 were the total United Nations member state. These almost doubled to 118 by 1965, and thus the United Nations Security Council's seats were increased to 50. However, from now it has almost increased to 193, but the seats have remained same. There is no representation either to the whole African Union or to any South American, Latin or Caribbean states. No permanent representation is provided in United Nations Security Council. Then these members, the permanent members, they have actually misused their sanctions and the veto power, as it was taken place in the case of Russia. So when Russia unprovoked unilaterally invaded Ukraine in the year of 2020, thus there was a kind of a resolution which was taken to be brought by USA, UK, France, etc. to actually sanction against Russia, but that was vetoed by Russia altogether. Also, if United Nations Security Council is not going to be functional when such important geopolitical tensions are taking place, don't you think that the important geopolitical decision making will start shifting to the regional groupings? But these regional groupings, like for example SAARC, SCO, or for example ASEAN, they have their own regional interest. And that regional interest will obviously not incorporate the overall geopolitical situation which is prevailing in the world. That is why there is a particular rationale of reforms which is being proposed by India, as it has been mentioned in the United Nations University research. For example, a council that is more reflective of the contemporary geopolitical realities. It is more representative council, more democratic, thus incorporating inclusive and participatory decision making. A council with membership that actually include regional powers, and that will obviously lead to what? A more effective council. So let's say for example in future you guys are giving an interview and the board members, they ask you that okay, what is your rationale why India shall be included? So obviously you will cite such important decision making power and veto power which comes with UNSC, but more importantly you should argue as an important advocate for India's inclusion by telling that how India is currently the world's largest democracy, as well as we have become the 4th largest economy, and we are aspiring to become Viksit Bharat or a developed nation by the year of 2047 with an economy of $30 trillion. Then with various initiatives like for example Doha Development Agenda, Vaccine Matri Initiative, or for example during our G20 presidency in 2023 how we included African Union in G20. We have basically emerged as a voice of Global South. Then we have fostered various multilateral platforms for global engagement on key issues. Like for example for energy security we have created International Solar Alliance. We have also joined Global Biofuel Alliance as well. Or for example, we are also the part of SAARC, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, which we are going to discuss today as well. At the same time, we are maintaining a balancing power by being the part of Quad as well. Then, following the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, keep this in mind that India has never shown unilateral aggression against any country in the world. Even the recent Operation Sindoor which we conducted, it was basically a retaliation against the Pahalgam attacks, where we basically attacked very important nuclear facilities of Pakistan, and we let them aware that yes, indeed, we are very well aware about the nuclear doctrine or plans which you are envisaging. We are basically not indulging directly in war because we want basically peace and tranquility across our borders. Then we have paid an immense contribution to humanitarian aid as well as UN peacekeeping mission. Keep this in mind, we have deployed more than 3 lakh personals in more than 50 plus missions of the UN peacekeeping across the country. And in 2007, we basically created history when we deployed the first ever all women UN peacekeeping unit where in Liberia. But there are several challenges also which we face. For example, the polarization of world which has taken place, where there is a rising Russia-China or Sino-Russia nexus, and that basically act as a kind of a contradictory to the G7 countries led by USA, Russia, China, all of them are permanent members. So we cannot have a uniform backing from all of these countries at the one point of time. Obviously, our dear neighbor China vehemently oppose our inclusion altogether. Then, right now, the USA, the European countries, they are basically labeling India as a laundromat country. The country which is basically buying a lot of oil from Russia and thus indirectly funding the Ukraine war. That is also an allegation which we are taking on ourselves. So these G4 countries, the Brazil, Japan, India, Germany, the emerging powers who want to be included as permanent members and thus expansion of United Nations Security Council, this particular inclusion is actually being opposed by the Coffee Club. Coffee Club is basically a kind of a group which calls for status quo that shall be maintained. So there shall be no increase in the permanent members. Rather, the increase shall be taken place in non-permanent members. And these Coffee Club countries include your Pakistan, Mexico, Brazil, etc., who are obviously backed by China. So this is the proposed structure of reforms which is coming from various groupings. Like for example, G4 which include Brazil, Germany, India and Japan. African Union consisting of 54 countries. CARICOM or the Caribbean Community which consists of 14 members. All of them basically calls for what? For increase of at least 6 seats in the permanent seats of United Nations Security Council. The 6 seats from which 2 will come from Africa, 2 from Asia Pacific, 1 which will belong to Latin America and Caribbean, and 1 which will belong to Western European. This is being opposed by the UFC Uniting for Consensus or Coffee Club consisting of Italy, Korea, Mexico, Pakistan, which wants to maintain the status quo. Then G4 is basically saying that the non-permanent seats shall be increased to at least 50. So 4 or 5 more seats shall be increased there. This Coffee Club basically says that the seats shall increase to 21, non-permanent seat, and creation of new category of membership based on the longer term non-permanent seat shall be done. The G4 countries basically say that how the new permanent member shall not exercise the veto right until a decision has been taken during the review, and that is 15 years after the reform. So these are the major reforms or the structure of reform which is being suggested by the G4 countries. Keep this in your mind while you are writing this particular answer, and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights the issue of landslides which takes place in the Western Ghats and suggests for the implementation of eco-sensitive zone as well as disaster tourism to make people more aware about the environmental loss which is taking place, and thus it forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger idea of environment conservation. So what is the context of a news? Over a year after the cloudburst actually tore down the Mundakkai Churlamala Valley in Kerala's Wayanad district on July 30, 2024, which ultimately led to the complete flattening of human settlements as well as splitting the river into 2. So, a local villager basically recalls that how there is a memory of what we were, and we are going to build on that. The stream will become a river over the period of time, and the trees will grow back, but this time we are not going to cut them. Why? Because the long roots which penetrate till the bedrock, it actually holds the soil. So, in the area of Wayanad, the local villagers, it earlier used to be a very kind of a tourist hub for the misty blue hills and forest. But now, after the landslide disaster which took place, it has been declared as a fragile eco zone by the state. Thus, what these people have done, they have basically kind of made it a ground zero. And they take the tourist actually first to this ground zero to show the disaster which occurred there, to actually sensitize the people about the anthropogenic activities and how they are causing to such increase in disasters. In this particular area, after being declared as fragile ecozone, no human settlement is possible anymore. So the article basically highlights that how the Gadgil committee, which was created in 2011 and submitted its report, it has basically kind of warned about such increasing number of disasters which will take place in the eco-fragile zone of the Western Ghats, and thus it has suggested to be declaring the entire Wayanad as eco-sensitive zone. Keep this in mind that how even though the kind of the villagers who live in this particular Wayanad district, they are promoting this disaster tourism, but there is no such specific state policy as such. So the question which shall arise in your mind is that first and foremost, why these Western Ghats are so important to us and why they are so prone to landslides. We will discuss them one by one. The first is to understand the importance of Western Ghats. Western Ghats, which basically act as a kind of a continuous mountain zone on the west coast of our country, where they span in almost 6 states, starting from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa. Karnataka has the longest stretch of the Western Ghat, and then Tamil Nadu, and ultimately they end in Kerala. Keep this in mind that these Western Ghats, they were basically created because of the volcanic activity. The volcanic activity which basically began because of the kind of the breaking of the large continent which we had called as Gondwana, and this event took place in Triassic period. So the kind of the fissure based structure which they create, they are also called as the Great Escarpment of India, where they are more than 1600 plus kilometers long. And the highest peak of Western Ghat is Anai Mudi. Keep this in mind that towards the south they basically curve down a little bit and they actually end up meeting Eastern Ghat. So there is a place where Western Ghat and Eastern Ghat, both of them meets. The question for the day is, what is the name of that particular place? Keep this in mind that they start from the Tapi estuary in north and stretch up to Kanyakumari in south, where they are not completely a continuous zone because there exist 3 major gaps: Goa, Palghat and Shenkotta. They are one of, keep this in mind, 44 UNESCO World Heritage Site. So very recently another UNESCO World Heritage Site has been added, and that is the Maratha military landscape. They are also one out of 36 biodiversity hotspot, where they consist of almost 30% of the country's flora and fauna, and almost 60% of this flora and fauna is completely endemic or not found anywhere in the country. The question which shall arise in your mind is, what is the importance of the Western Ghats? Keep this in mind that this mountain range which is present right here, they act as a very important watershed in the peninsular India. So they act as a watershed to the southwest monsoon which enters from here. The monsoonal winds which are blowing like this, these are basically easterlies, but because of the low pressure which has been created here, they basically kind of do the reversal. This is called a seasonal reversal of the wind, and they start blowing towards our India. So when these cloud bearing air pressure basically reaches here, it leads to a large scale watershed in this windfall region. Thus they also have large amount of pristine forest which has been prevailing or untouched by humanity since years, and thus they act in neutralizing an estimated 4 million tons of carbon every year. That is almost 10% of the emission which is neutralized by all of India's forest. So yes, indeed they are very important to us. But then the question shall be coming in your mind is that why they are so prone to the landslide. To understand that, we'll basically refer to the Landslide Atlas of India, which is released by ISRO, where it basically classifies that how almost 14% of the area of Kerala is actually prone to landslide, which is the state which has the highest area which is prone to the landslide in our country, that is Sikkim, and it has 60% of its area under the, or which is very susceptible to the landslide. So there are basically 2 important factors. One is conditioning factor and one is triggering factor for the landslide. The first and foremost is the soil topography of Western Ghat. So as we have discussed these soil which basically contains in the Western Ghat region, they have been created in very high temperature and very high precipitation, and thus they basically consist of laterite soil, which is not very established, or let's say for example very stable for a long period of time. So it has a kind of a tendency to erode very easily. But this erosion has further been magnified because of one anthropogenic activity. What is that? So earlier in this particular region, the kind of a traditional and local based regional crops were grown in the region of Western Ghat. So the farmers, they basically used to grow, let's say for example, clove, cinnamon, pepper, etc. But now these suitable for the regional agroclimatic conditions which prevail there, these crops has now been kind of replaced with the cash crops, like for example tea, coffee, rubber, etc. So these regional crops, they basically had kind of long roots, and thus they used to kind of glue the top soil layer with the bedrock which used to persist. So because of that, let's say for example, if there is an extreme weather event which is taking place, let's say for example flash flood or cloud burst, etc., the top soil layer was basically glued to the bedrock, and thus it was not used to be easily move away with any such force, wind or water, etc. But now because it has been replaced with the cash crops which has very shallow roots, this top soil layer is very easily removable. Then the rock geomorphology also plays the role. So as we have discussed that in this particular area, the rock formation which has taken place, it is of the nature of igneous rock, which has been created because of volcanic activity. So they contain a lot of fissures. The fissures in which in case of very high precipitation, a lot of water can be accumulated, and thus it tears or break down very easily. Thus ultimately increasing the removal of this topsoil, it leads to a kind of a formation of a slope angle. Just look here, how this metastable or steeper slope with very large scale precipitation is very easily converted into a kind of an unstable slope, leading to a large scale landslide as it took place. And then there are several triggering factors. So the global warming induced climate change which is taking place, that is leading to extreme weather events, or let's say for example high precipitation. Then large scale land use changes and unscientific construction has also taken place. Why? Because of the various anthropogenic pressure which is taking place. The rampant urbanization, creation of dams, infrastructure. To understand that, let's say for example, with the boom of social media which took place. So now there are a lot of people who actually want to spend their holidays in the scenic location because they have to, kind of upload aesthetic pictures on Instagram as well. So don't you think that there is now a large scale movement which is taking place to the pristine locations of Western Ghats? When that is taking place, so there is a large number of people with high propensity to consume which are being accumulated in a specific area. Don't you think the trade and economic activity in that particular area will actually boom? And thus it will also create further revenue for the government. So the government will start creating various kind of infrastructure in this region. And that has basically led to the land use changes and unscientific constructions as well. Then yes, obviously, if this population keeps on increasing over a period of time, we need to create jobs for them. For that job, we very easily talk about, let's say for example, industrialization. But to actually employ these people in the industries, don't you think will require more natural reserves? More mining activities will actually take place. Mining of what? Mining of iron, bauxite, manganese, the resources which are prevalent in the region of Western Ghats. Or for example, the growing of commercial crops as well as unchecked livestock grazing. Just look at the article here. How Karnataka has rejected the Kasturi Rangan report on the Western Ghat. Why? For what? For political pressure from local representatives despite growing ecological threat to biodiversity because of the economic concerns. Then with this rampant urbanization which is taking place, obviously there is a loss of what? Blue and green water spaces. And this loss has led to the blockage of stream networks, as well as this particular region is also pressurized by more than 100 plus mini hydropower projects. Look at the impact of rampant deforestation which is taking place in Western Ghat. The loss of fertile soil cover or topsoil will also lead to decline in food productivity. The loss of sink of carbon dioxide will further increase the greenhouse gases, further loss of habitat for wildlife. This plants or trees, they use, because of the process of evapotranspiration, they use to release moisture in air, creates atmospheric river. Further loss of precipitation will take place. So these are the various stages of landslide which take place. When the particular this bedrock or the bottom soil layer has been lost, becomes very easy for the surface runoff in the case of large scale, let's say for example any extreme weather event. In the case of high precipitation or prolonged rainfall, or if there is a rampant construction which is taking place here where the wave or steam erosion is taking place. Thus, taking the cognizance of it, there were two important committees which basically provided for a lot of important recommendation. Like for example, there was Gadgil committee, which basically suggested to convert the entire Western Ghat into eco-sensitive zone, where each state shall be responsible for their share of Western Ghat. And any such demarcation of eco-sensitive zone will be only done by taking the input from the local communities. Then there will be a statutory body which will be created by the passing of an act by the parliament, and that will be Western Ghat Ecological Authority, which will have supervision power over any such illegal construction activity which is taking place. Also, no new environmental clearance will be given for any mining, and ultimately the Gadgil committee suggested for phasing out mining altogether by the year of 2015, with no new red and orange industries to be created in this particular region, Western Ghat, which are spanning for 1600 kilometers in 6 states. Do you think it is a possibility? Red and orange industries, which are basically the polluting industries. So obviously the government basically rejected the report of Gadgil committee and appointed another committee, and that was Kasturi Rangan. Kasturi Rangan committee suggested that there shall be at least preservation of 90% of landscape, natural landscape, and we will declare 37% of the Western Ghat as eco-sensitive zone. The business will continue, but the idea would be that over a period of time, these businesses shall adopt more greener practices. If there is any polluting industry, a new polluting industry, that will not be allowed in the region of Western Ghat. And the projects which will be allowed, they will be only allowed to be created after the consent of Gram Sabha, and the people who are already inhabiting this region in the forest, the tribal people, their rights of minor forest produce under Forest Right Act 2006 will be kind of addressed. Because this was completely advisory to the government at that point of time and has not been strictly implemented, it has basically led to large scale deforestation which is taking place in various states, like for example Kerala as well. Look at the target which has been done under the Green India Mission to actually do the afforestation, and look at the shortfalls which we have achieved. Thus, there are certain affirmative action which has been taken by the government of India. First and foremost is to actually declare ecological sensitive area or zone under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, under which, let's say for example, if there is a particular district Wayanad and it has been declared as ecologically sensitive areas, then there are certain prohibited activities there and certain regulated activity. For example, commercial mining, commercial use of timber, polluting industry, any major hydroelectric project or discharge of solid waste is completely prohibited. Then there are certain activities which are allowed but they will be regulated, like for example felling of trees, so deforestation can take place, establishment of recreational infrastructure, commercial use of water, if the government wants to lay down underground cable for let's say digital connectivity, or any drastic change in cropping pattern, even that is allowed. Thus, with this effort, the government has basically shown in the Indian State of Forest Report 2023 that the forest and tree cover has increased to 25.17%, but keep this in mind that it is still a shortfall to the target which we have set for ourselves under the National Forest Policy of 1988, where we have said that 1/3 of the geographical area of the country will be brought under the forest cover. The increase in the forest cover in 2 years was as minuscule as 156 km square. When we talk about the largest decrease which has been registered in the forest cover, keep this in mind that Karnataka majorly featured there. So what can be done? What can be the way forward? First and foremost, there is a very important concept of agroforestry, where on the banks of the agricultural field or in the middle of the agricultural fields, we can start growing more trees, which will also help in kind of holding the soil. It will kind of reduce the landslides. In urban areas, we can use the urban afforestation method, that is Miyawaki method. Then we can also use the accredited compensatory afforestation in the Forest Conservation Act of 2023, where let's say for example if there is a very important natural reserves in a particular area of Kerala, then the same amount of land shall be at least cultivated with forest in some other part of the Kerala. So that will create a kind of a balance. The recommendation of Gadgil committee to actually declare some very important eco-fragile zone as eco-sensitive zones shall be done. Then we can actually go for mass forestation under the Green India mission, following the template of 2 billion trees which are actually being cultivated in Canada. The Green India mission, which was launched in 2014, which is a centrally sponsored scheme, where it has two major aims. Keep this in mind. First, to increase the forest cover on 5 million hectare of forest and non-forest land, and then to improve the quality of forest cover on additional 5 million hectare of forest land, which will ultimately help us to enhance CO2 sequestration by 60 million tons by the year of 2030, and thus it will also help our Panchamrit target. Keep all of this in your mind while you are writing this particular question, and we move forward to the next news, where a very interesting article has appeared telling us about a very important and innovative solution which can be done to actually tackle the issue of malaria. So let's first see what is the context of the news. In malaria control, the Mass Drug Administration actually aims to reduce the size of the human reservoir. The global malaria death, it has remained high, with Africa being the worst affected. So for example, if we look at the kind of the momentum which the world was following as per the World Malaria Report of 2024, it has actually declined in between the last decade. So in 2023, malaria actually claimed 6 lakh lives, 95% of which actually took place in the African region. In our country, yes indeed, we have actually witnessed 80% drop in the cases, but there exists rampant and persistent transmission in the states like Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and several northeastern states. So the article today suggests that how there is a particular medicine called as ivermectin, which has emerged as a promising systematic insecticide after discoveries actually show that it can kill malaria carrying mosquito. The Bohemia trial, which was conducted in Kenya, it actually found that how this ivermectin doses can actually cut the malaria cases by 26% in children. Thus, what is this particular ivermectin? It is basically a kind of an endectocide. Endectocide is a kind of an insecticide that works from inside the human body. So if let's say for example there is a mosquito which will sit on my hand and will try to beat me, but I have taken let's say for example ivermectin, then this mosquito will basically end up dying and it will not spread malaria inside my body. Why this malaria is such a serious issue? Because the World Health Organization's report call it a lingering threat, where there is a more increasing threat to malaria because of the global health, because of the rapid urbanization which is taking place, unplanned urbanization. Let's say for example you can now see more potholes on the road. With more potholes on the road and extreme weather events, or let's say for example large scale precipitation taking place, it can actually lead to more water logging issue and thus provide more ideal conditions for the mosquitoes to breed, which mosquitoes basically causes malaria. So malaria is a parasitic infection which is transmitted by mosquito. Keep this in mind, only female Anopheles mosquitoes can spread malaria. And what it leads to? It leads to seizure, fluid in lung or organ damage, and ultimately it can also cause death. So as per World Health Organization, malaria, a disease which is being caused by the bite of a mosquito, actually leads to the death of more than 4 lakh people annually, and it is very much endemic in the various African countries like for example Nigeria, Congo, Tanzania, Mozambique and Burkina Faso. Keep this in mind. This can be a very important prelims question, where there are several diseases which are very specifically caused by mosquito. Malaria and dengue, this might be very easy for you to guess. Beside that, West Nile virus, Zika virus, yellow fever, lymphatic filariasis as well as chikungunya. So there was a very new study which was actually conducted by the University of California. Normally it was actually being suggested that with the increasing global temperature, which is also increasing in Africa, the mosquitoes will actually start moving towards more colder region. However, this new study by University of California has found that Anopheles mosquito, which causes malaria, they are actually spreading into cooler and drier parts of Africa as well as in the more hot regions as well, because they have a natural variations in their Z which can actually help them to tolerate the heat better. Thus, with further penetration of malaria-carrying mosquitoes in such region where they were not present earlier, it can actually risk billion more people from dengue and malaria by 2100. Some of you might suggest that why we should not completely eradicate these mosquitoes altogether. The answer to that is that they actually play pivotal role in the food chain as well as the pollination of the plants. So, just look at the reported malaria cases in our country. Yes, indeed, it has significantly declined when it comes to in the terms of million. However, keep this in mind that the malaria deaths is still a large contributor to the deaths which occur in our country. So what has been the steps which has been taken by the government of India? First and foremost, you guys can recall a news which we covered in the month of June, where Indian Council of Medical Research has actually developed a indigenous vaccine called as Adfalki-Vax, which is basically a chimeric recombinant vaccine. What is a chimeric recombinant vaccine? It basically uses the different part of the genes of a pathogen, in this case, which is the pathogen that is Plasmodium. And thus it creates target proteins, which ultimately triggers an immune response. Did we have any kind of vaccine even before this Adfalki-Vax? The answer is yes. They were RTS-S and R21. They were approved, but their efficiency was as low as 75%. So unlike RTS-S and R21, this Adfalki-Vax, it actually uses Pro6C protein, which has a stronger immune response. And because it uses adjuvant alum, it actually does not pose any risk of chronic inflammation. Now here is a very important point, very interesting one also. This vaccine, which has been developed by the Indian Council of Medical Research, Adfalki-Vax, an indigenous vaccine, it will work against Plasmodium falciparum. But in our country, malaria is actually caused by Plasmodium vivax. So basically, the particular kind of strain of parasite which causes malaria in our country, that is Plasmodium vivax. But we have not developed vaccine for that. We have actually developed for Plasmodium falciparum. What are the other steps which has been taken by the government of India? So very recently, a very important headline, how Center has granted the license to 5 firms to manufacture their first indigenous malaria vaccine. Beside that, we have National Framework for Malaria Elimination. Then we are actually trying to fill the potholes, sensitize the people, actually ensure that water logging does not take place. Let's say, for example, even when you guys are cleaning the utensils in your houses, make sure that there is no water logging which is taking place there also. So basically all of this sensitization is taking place under the National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program. Then we have also kind of partnership with World Health Organization to create high burden to high impact initiative to target certain very malaria prone regions in our country. For which purpose we have launched digitalization and surveillance integrated health information platform, and ICMR has launched Malaria Elimination Research Alliance as well. Keep this in mind that this Aedes mosquito, it actually feeds indoor during the day and at night under artificial light. So methods like outdoor fumigation, vaporizers and bed nets can be very effective against them. Then municipal corporations and resident welfare associations should stop depending only on fogging. They should also use a strategy with top-down and bottom features. So 100 to 200 meter safe zones can be created. Loose clothing that cover as much of body as possible. Safe non-insecticides and community actions to remove such larval breeding sites or waterlogging sites shall be done. So keep these innovative suggestions in your mind as well, and we move forward to the next news, which is very, very integral for your prelims examination of 2026, as in the UNESCO's Biosphere reserves which we have in our country, a new Biosphere reserve, that is Cold Desert Biosphere reserves, has been included, which is in the state of Himachal Pradesh. And that has been included in the World Network of Biosphere Reserves by the UNESCO, a global recognition that actually places this 7,700 km² area spread across the states Lahaul and Spiti district on the international conservation map. Keep this in mind that with this addition, now our country has 13 biospheres which are listed. So in this meeting which took place, where this meeting took place, the 37th session of UNESCO's International Committee of Man and Biosphere Program. The meeting took place in Paris. 26 new biosphere reserves across 21 countries were added, and that is highest in 20 years. So the total number of this man and biosphere reserve sites which exist in the world now is 785, is spread in 142 countries. Out of this 785, our country has 13 such World Biosphere Network sites in our country. Keep this in mind that there was one site which was excluded back in the year of 2020, that was Gulf of Mannar. However, on the official side, Gulf of Mannar is still listed as one of the man and biosphere reserve sites of our country. Now, the question which shall be coming in your mind is that what is this man and biosphere program which was launched in 1971? It was basically to kind of protect the areas of fragile and unique terrestrial, marine and coastal ecosystem. These were basically the reserves which will be treated as kind of natural laboratories for sustainable development. So, unlike other reserves, the human activities in these biosphere reserves will not be excluded. Rather, the local communities will actually be kind of utilized to kind of learn from their traditional practices of kind of environment conservation. Like for example, how in our country we have sacred groves. Once, if it is included, they get any kind of permanent status? The answer is no. Which was the first biosphere reserves to be recognized under this Man and Biosphere Reserve Program in 1976? That was the island of Zhevny Gorod in Russia. So when such biosphere reserve is listed, keep this in mind, it has three areas. First is the core area. The core area is that area which is minimally disturbed ecosystem. For long-term conservation and scientific research is allowed here. Then the adjacent area to core area is buffer zone, where your environmental education takes place, recreational activities take place, ecotourism can take place here, as well as applied research on flora and fauna takes place. The most outermost part is the transition area, where the human communities, the tribal people, they are basically residing there. And they can use this area within the biosphere reserves for agriculture as well as certain economic uses. For example, collection of minor forest produce. Now, this list is very important. Take a screenshot, keep this list very important to you for the prelims examination. Look at here. These are the total biosphere reserves in India, and the one with asterisk belongs to the World Network of Biosphere Reserve of UNESCO. So for example, cold desert was yet not included, but now it has been included in the UNESCO list. Then there is Nanda Devi in Uttarakhand, Kutch in Gujarat, Panchmadi in Madhya Pradesh, Achankamar Amarkantak in Chhattisgarh, then Nilgiri in Karnataka, Agast Malya in Tamil Nadu, Simlipal in Odisha, Sheshachalam in Andhra Pradesh, Gulf of Mannar, Great Nicobar, Sundarban in West Bengal, Nokrek in Meghalaya, and Kanchenjunga in the region of Sikkim. Now, one year what UPSC did, look here at Agast Malya Biosphere Reserve. It basically consists of various wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserves and national parks, like for example Shendruni, Pepra, Nair Wildlife Sanctuary and Kalakkad Mandantharai Tiger Reserve. In 2019 prelims question, what UPSC did, it asked a question that which of the following forms the part of Agast Malya Biosphere Reserves. So the kind of the idea is that all the important wildlife sanctuaries and national parks which forms the part of a biosphere reserve has been listed for you, and each and every important animals which are found there, the fauna species, they have also been included there. Like for example, for understanding, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which was also the first biosphere reserve to be included in the MAP program, it consists of Mudumulai, Mukurti, Nagarhole, Bandipur and Silent Valley National Park spreading in the region of Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And then it also consists of Wayanad and Satyamangalam Wildlife Sanctuary, where it has certain characteristic fauna, like for example lion-tailed macaque, Nilgiri tahar, Malabar giant squirrel and Nilgiri langur. Each of theirs IUCN status has been listed here for you as well. So one very specific which you keep in your mind as there is a recent inclusion, that is the Cold Desert Biosphere Reserve, which consists of Pin Valley National Park, Kibber Wildlife Sanctuary, Chandratal Wetland and Sarchu Plain, which basically kind of consist of your wind spit plateaus, glacial valleys, alpine lakes, as well as high altitude desert, where it has very important flora, like for example 655 herbs, 41 shrubs, 17 tree species, and 47 medicinal plant. The flagship fauna species which is found here is snow leopard, blue sheep, ibex, as well as Himalayan wolf. So for just like this, remember for all of them, you can also create a list of their IUCN status as well. So these two particular tables are very important for your prelims examination. Keep them in mind, and we move forward to the next news, where the examination which you guys have been preparing for, that is the Union Public Service Commission, the creation of this commission has now completed 100 years, and thus it becomes very important for the next year prelims examination as well. What is the context of the news? So when our constitution came into effect in India on 26th of January 1950, so did some institutions that actually enabled the foundation of a newly democratic nation. One such institution was Union Public Service Commission. At the time, it was actually founded on 1st of October 1926 under, keep this in mind, the Montague-Chelmsford Reforms or the Government of India Act of 1919, and at that point of time, the Union Public Service Commission was actually known as a Public Service Commission. Then from the year of 1937 till the date of January 26, 1950, it was actually known as Federal Public Service Commission. So, keep this in mind, that how this idea of bureaucracy actually developed. First and foremost, when the East India Company came here, it consisted of factors. Factors were basically the kind of traders. But very soon these traders, they basically started kind of adopting various important administrative functions. Like for example, dealing with the kings, signing treaties with them. So these employees of East India Company over a period of time started acting as a mercantile servant. These mercantile servant, the first Governor General of Bengal under the Regulating Act of 1773, which was Warren Hastings. So he was Governor General from 1773 to 1785. He basically created these mercantile servant and appointed some talented people of them as revenue collector. At one point of time, this revenue collector also had the power to actually kind of preside as a judicial magistrate over your kind of mal adalat or civil courts. And thus these terms district collector and district magistrate actually became synonymous with these officers. In 1855, the Civil Service Commission was first created in Britain, and in 1855 its jurisdiction was extended to Indian civil services. The reason was the Government of India Act 1858, which was basically kind of enacted on 1st of November 1858, because of which the formalization of the colonization of our country took place, because in the revolt of 1857, the company basically ended up defeating all the rebelling kings, and thus the company was abolished and the charge to control the Indian territory was taken by the Crown of Britain. Keep this in mind that in 1926, when this Public Service Commission was created, it was on the recommendation of Lee Commission, which was formed in the year of 1924. So we'll just have a very quick look at the evolution of the civil services in our country. The first and foremost is to understand the covenanted civil services, which was basically created by Cornwallis. Cornwallis said that these district collectors, these district magistrates will now be appointed by the Court of Directors. And because these district magistrates, they had the power to collect the revenue, and they were also basically kind of indulging in private trade. Why? Because they were basically misusing the dastak rights at that point of time. So Cornwallis said that if we want to stop bribe and corruption by these officials, it is very important to do two things. First, raise salary of the civil servant, so that their economic need is basically fulfilled by the government itself, as it has done by Singapore government as well. They basically pay their Indian Administrative Services officer, like IAS officers, their very high salary. So they do not have that kind of incentive to actually do some corruption. Then strict enforcement of rules against private trade, and promotion will be done on the basis of seniority, something which is still followed today. However, keep this in mind that Cornwallis also followed a superior race theory, where he basically considered that Indians are not capable enough to actually become a district magistrate or, for example, a district collector. In 1798, there was another Governor General of Bengal which was appointed, and that was Lord Wellesley, who basically brought a very famous policy called as policy of subsidiary alliance. So in 1800, he created Fort William College in Calcutta to actually bring the civil servants of Europe to our country and make them kind of habitable or more familiar with the Indian tradition and culture. However, this practice was completely discarded, and the examination and training of such people, civil servants who were appointed in India, majorly European, it was basically conducted from 1806 onwards in East India College at Haileybury. For the first time, the call for inclusion of Indians in civil services was actually made by Charter Act of 1833, which stated that no native of India shall be disabled from holding any public office because of the religion, birth or color obviously. However, this was not implemented. It came into the force through the Charter Act of 1853, which actually opened the open competition system for Indians, that exam will take place and the Indians can also appear in that, and thus it took away the power of court of directors to appoint officer, as it was done by Cornwallis. Ultimately, the Indian Civil Services Act of 1861 established the rule around the civil services, that there will be an examination, written and interview, which will take place in London, where the people will be tested in English and classical languages of Latin and Greek, and the permissible age was kept at maximum 22 years. So for example, if any one of you who is watching this lecture is 23 years old now, as per the older norms, you have now become ineligible to attempt the paper. Can anybody tell me, in the year of 1863, who actually became the first Indian to qualify into the civil services? A very interesting data I will share with you. From the year of 1863 till the year of 1885, only 40 Indians were actually attempted the paper, keep this in mind, not qualified, attempted in 24 years. And only 10 of them ultimately got selected. So you're talking about the competition now, imagine the competition at that point of time. Then came Lytton. Lytton basically reduced the maximum age to more 19 years. And he basically envisaged to create a statutory civil services where 1/6 of the post will actually be filled by the high position Indian families or Raja. Basically the concept of nepotism. And that's why it was actually rejected by the Acheson Committee on Public Services. It said there shall be two services. First, Imperial Indian Services, and then a Provincial Civil Services. Indian civil services are basically the kind of the services which will be taking place at the all India level, and that became your Indian Civil Services or ICS, for which the exam used to be conducted in London. For small posts at provincial level, there will be a Provincial Civil Service examination and the age will be 23 years. Ultimately, the Montfort reforms come, Montague and Chelmsford reform, which provided for simultaneous exam. So now the examination started to be conducted in India also from the year of 1923 onwards, and 33% recruitment will be done by Indians. Use your knowledge by solving this particular question, you will find it very easy. So today's article also provides us some important insight which you guys should remember. First, who was the first chairman of Union Public Service Commission? That was Ross Barker, who served from 1926 to 32. Keep this in mind. Then, under the Government of India Act 1935, a commission was created for both federation and each provinces as well. So it became Federal Public Service Commission. And the first chairman was your Ira Gordon. So when India became independent, this Federal Public Service Commission at that point of time was being headed by H.K. Kripalani. And after that, R.N. Banerjee took over. During his tenure, the constitution came into effect. And it did two changes. First, the Federal Public Service Commission's name was changed now to Union Public Service Commission. And the Indian Civil Services became the Indian Administrative Services. Till from then, there are various commissions and committees which has been created to bring reforms in UPSC. UPSC can give their names and ask you which of the following committee was created for the reforms in UPSC. Keep their names in mind. First, Administrative Reform Commission by Morarji Desai. Then your Thorat panel 1967, then Kothari panel of 1976, Satish Chandra panel, Alag committee, PC Hota panel of 2004 and Anur Nivagekar panel of 2012. All of them have shaped the UPSC's current recruitment pattern. And with this, we move forward to the next news, where the news talks about Yug Yugeen Bharat Museum, a very important component of your art and culture. What is the context? A consortium led by architectural firm Arcop Associates has emerged as the best bidder For what? For the upcoming Yug Yugeen Bharat Museum. This, which when it will be created, it will be actually end up becoming the largest museum in the world, for which we have actually signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of France, and it will be modeled on the Louvre Museum, which take place or exists now in Paris. Keep this in mind that it will actually end up replacing. So this Yug Yugeen Bharat Museum will replace the National Museum which we have right now, which was actually established on 15th of August 1949 on the recommendation of Guire Committee of 1946, which was very recently in the news as well, because the dancing girl's replica was actually stolen from the Delhi's National Museum. Again, there are a lot of artifacts beside this dancing girl as well. So why this dancing girl, which was also featured in this year prelims examination, is important to us? Because it is considered as the world's oldest bronze statue which was created using the lost wax method technique. Beside this dancing girl, there are several Indus Valley civilization artifacts which we actually find in the National Museum. Like for example, the skeleton which we find from Rakhigadi, which is also considered as the provincial capital of Indus Valley civilization, being it the largest IVC site to be excavated. Then we also find their terracotta image of Mother Goddess. We also find Pashupati seal, the Pashupati seal which we actually found from Mohenjo-daro, which is made up of statite, where we actually see a kind of a priest-like figure wearing a headgear, sitting on a throne. The throne which is surrounded by fauna which existed at that point of time in IVC, like elephant, tiger, rhino, buffalo and 2 antelopes. Keep this in mind that such horned deity does not only appear from Mohenjo-daro but also from 2 other sites, and that is Kot Dizi and Kalibangan. And then there obviously exists the script which we cannot read till now because it has become undeciphered. Some students' writing is also like these scripts. Now, keep this in mind, one more important artifact which we find at National Museum and belongs to Indus Valley civilization is the toy cart of Banavli, and that basically shows that Hadappans had actually discovered the wheel, and the transportation which they were doing where they were actually using wheels. Then we find very important Buddhist artifacts as well, like Barhut railing from the stupa. The sage Asita visit which has been represented here. Asita was basically the monk who visited Sudhodana, the father of Gautam Buddha, and made the prophecy that either your son is going to become the biggest king in the world or the best monk in the world. That's why Buddha was sheltered in the palaces. Also, it contains artifacts from both the school, Gandhar and Mathura, both of the schools which were actually patronized by the Kushans. So keep all of these things in your mind and we move forward to the last news, where the BRICS nation had actually featured in the news. Why? Because the group of countries, a club of 11 emerging markets, they have actually called out protectionism and tariff volatility, where in the foreign ministers meeting which took place at the 80th session of UNGA, where these countries are navigating now the upheaval to global trade following the US President Donald Trump's tariff policies this year. So how this BRICS actually came into the existence? First and foremost, Brazil, Russia, India and China, they came together to form BRIC in 2006. It was Russia which basically initiated the creation of this bloc. At that point of time, South Africa was not a member. In 2001, keep this in mind, this acronym of BRIC was coined by Jim O'Neill, then chief economist of Goldman Sachs, where he basically talked about the growth potential which these countries had, and that is also visible even today. In 2006, the leader of BRICS countries met for the first time in St. Petersburg, Russia. Ultimately, in 2009, the first BRICS summit was actually held in Russia, and in 2011, the South Africa joined as well. The bloc was established as a counterbalance to the prevailing world order dominated by United States and Western allies. Spearheaded by Russia, it was actually envisioned as an informal club, but over a period of time, it has actually emerged into a multilateral organization. Keep this in mind. All the members of the BRICS are also the part of G20, and recently it has admitted 6 new members. Which are these 6 new members? Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and UAE. So keep the name of these 11 countries very dear to you, which has a combined population of 3.7% and has a contribution to the GDP which actually extends more than 33%. So keep all of this important data in your mind, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.